What's up, Trekkies? It's your boy Will Wofford here with Trekker's Delight, a Star Trek-inspired podcast. Before we get started, we're going to give away $100, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel where we will announce the lucky winner every single week. Now, welcome to Trekker's Delight.
All right, after that fantastic Will West Studios intro, I'm Marie Brownhill, as I said, and I'm here with Jermaine Watson.
How you doing?
And we're going to talk about First Contact. So briefly, what this episode is about is Riker has gone down to the planet Malcor in disguise because the Malcorians are on the verge of discovering warp technology, and it's a standard protocol for Federation to investigate these, basically investigate these pre-warp civilizations that are on the cusp of becoming warp-capable civilizations, and these are the folks that are going to join the interstellar community. And Riker, unfortunately, I don't know, he gets hit by the planet's equivalent of like a bus or something, and he ends up in the hospital. The problem with that is, if he ends up in the hospital, then they're going to do medical scans on him, and they're going to discover that, he's not
dude is an alien.
Right, he's not so much a Malcorian. Well, back up on the Enterprise, they know this is a problem because they've retrieved the rest of the team, and so now they're hunting down Riker. That means that our stalwart Enterprise crew then has to go and contact somebody on the planet. And so the first person they choose is Marasta Yale, who is the scientist that's in charge of the warp program. Y'all, she is on board. Mm-hmm. All right, she is on board. She is not quite as on board as Juliana Margulies' character that we'll get to in a second, but she's on board. And so she facilitates an introduction between Picard and the Chancellor, who is Avel Durkin, or Dervin, because apparently I can't remember names to save my life today. And so that introduction goes super, super well. The problem about all of this is that the Malcorians have a fundamental belief that their species is the center of the universe. And the problem is being introduced to a larger interstellar community of spacefaring races, species, whatever, means they're not. And so as news of Riker's alienness starts to spread, they talk to Dervin, and Dervin brings in Counselor Krolla, who is their Minister of Security. And Krolla thinks this is the worst idea since a lead balloon. And he is terrified of what this is, what Miranda's discovery is going to do to their people, their culture, everything that makes them Malcorian. Ultimately, Krolla finds Riker first, while all of these other really great conversations are going on. Eventually, Dervin figures out that, they did have research teams on the planet. They talk about why. Dervin's not wild, but he kind of gets down with it. So Krolla basically finds Riker in this hospital. They try to break him out briefly, but it doesn't go super well. Also,
horrible fail.
Character, there's also an interlude where she takes advantage of him.
So that's actually BB Newworth.
I'm sorry?
That's actually BB Newworth.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it was Margulies.
Linnell. The character she played is Linnell.
Mm-hmm. Again, further evidence that I'm killing it with both my names and my
okay.
my trivia knowledge.
It's okay. I fell in love with her during Cheers, and they wanted to do a spinoff with her.
Yeah, because she was Lilith.
Yes, and she was
Lilith. That's right.
She was it.
Oh my gosh. So my apologies. My apologies to that august actress. Also, speaking of errors that I made, it wasn't a Private Little War where Kirk recites the Pledge of Allegiance. That's actually the Omega Glory. So bad on me last episode. I am fixing it now.
There you go. That's exactly what journalists should do. Not to say that we're journalists, but hey, We make mistakes.
I mean, I play one on TV / the internet. Does that count? So anyway, going back to it, Corolla tracks down Riker. Riker has already been re-injured in his escape attempt. It's not really doing much of anything. And Corolla gets a hold of Riker's phaser and attempts to commit suicide. Trigger warning, by the way, content warning, be safe, folks, be safe. And he doesn't succeed, obviously, because he's, because it was set on stun, because Riker's a good Starfleet man. And Dr. Crusher finally figure out where Riker is. Dr. Crusher beams down, and Durban's like, "Did Riker shoot him?" And she's like, "No. Look at the burn pattern. Like, no, that's not what happened. This guy did it to himself." And eventually, Durban becomes convinced that that's true. However, in the same time, he becomes convinced that Malkorians are not ready to join the interstellar community. And much like Alexander did in our previous episode / the original series episode, Marasta Yale actually asks to be taken to the stars.
Yes.
And they agree. And so she joins, even though she'll never be able to return to her people or any of that, but she is in love with the idea of getting to see the stars. And so that is First Contact in a nutshell.
Yeah, I just want to start with the end first, in that we often see that in Star Trek, right? Like we see like this great, like your mind is percolating. So this particular character was like, "Nah, I want to do this. I want to explore the world. I'm not the world. I want to explore the universe." And you love her character, and you hope that they'll show. It's kind of like Ro Laren. Like that was a great character that we got to see a little bit of her arc for, but we didn't see this particular character, and I thought that she did an amazing job. Right? She's just a great actress.
I really kind of loved her name too, because I think her name Marasta is actually meant to bring to mind Miranda from The Tempest, where Miranda is the character that's looking forward, that looks beyond the island and wants to learn about all the other people. And that's Marasta in a nutshell. And then Yale, I think, comes from, the university, for science and development and all of that jazz. But I do really like the potential Shakespearean allusion there. And she's somewhat idealistic about it, but not in the sense that she comes across as completely naive. And we talked a little bit about ageism, I think, in our previous episode with respect to the original series. And I kind of like that Marasta Yale comes across as being older. I mean, she's kind of like the Malkorian equivalent of like a crazy cat lady.
No, not at all. Not at all. Like,
that she lives alone, in that her work is her life, that kind of thing.
Okay. I wasn't thinking about a family and the fact that she could just pick up and go and not worry about other family members. I wasn't even thinking about that. It was just, for me, it was just like, hey, if you want to be accomplished, especially like in that particular field, like she's thinking about science. Like, how many people is she actually going to have an intelligent conversation with? You know what I'm saying? Like, no, it's not going to be a whole.
I mean, I do. I think that's why she's lonely. And I think she's also very bad at playing politics, which is why she has a lot of trouble interacting with Corolla.
I don't know. Okay. So I saw that a little differently, and let me tell you why. So if your mind is in space, but you have like someone else who's always fearful, always afraid, always thinking that someone is going to have more power than you and they're going to best you. I mean, that was how he was coming. When she first saw them, she was scared, right? But she heard their logic and she was like, And if you recall, she also said, "Don't tell them now. You've done something that is going to open a can of worms. So don't tell them now." In my mind, she was playing politics. She just
absolutely.
She just didn't realize that Riker would have been found. If Riker had not been found and they would have been able to find Riker, it would have been
none of this episode would have happened.
I'm sorry, say
Like
that again.
this episode, like if Riker had not fallen,
yeah.
had not become injured and gotten and ended up in a hospital, none of this would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because then basically the Malcorians would have gone on and either initiated their warp program or not, based on whatever. And I lean in the direction of saying they would have initiated the warp program, because I don't think Krolla was going to win that one. I really don't. I don't think Krolla was going to win until he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to stave off the future. And I really, I find it very interesting that so let's jump around, because clearly that's what we're going to do today. I mean, I say that like it's any different from any other episode we've ever done. But the episode really seems to have a lot of sympathy for Krolla. Which I thought was interesting, because Krolla represents everything that one would think would be
status quo.
Well, antithetical to Star Trek's mission statement, if you will, right?
I agree.
Because he's all about like species superiority. He's all about fear. He's all about just all of these things. And remember, we kind of talked about, again, we talked about this last episode, and we're kind of bringing it forward to talk more specifically here. That's not something we saw in the original series, particularly.
Yeah.
Which I think is a marked difference, right? Like, I mean, when did this episode come out? Like, what year? Where is my magic mouse?
1992? 91? Okay.
First aired in February of 1991.
Okay.
So we're looking at a very different geopolitical situation from 66, 67, 68. We're looking at a very different culture, even.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of backlash to some nation building efforts. And I think we're seeing, and I do actually think we're seeing a little bit more sympathy for the conservative movement than we did in in Roddenberry's vision, because Roddenberry had an axe to grind.
But it was also in that time, the original series, in that time where it was almost in vogue to be liberal, right? It was in vogue almost. Juxtaposed the late 80s, early 90s, where the only way a Democrat would win the White House is if he posed as if he was almost Republican-like. You know what I'm saying? And so things had changed.
Sorry, excuse me. Clinton. Sorry. Something seems to be stuck in my historical throat here. Because this was during Bush 1's presidency. And yes, I did have to look that up on the internet.
It's okay. So yeah. So things were a little different, but also just to kind of look at today's society and compare it to that particular episode. So
now we're jumping a lot. We're jumping into disco now.
Well, I'm just talking about the United States right now in 2022, right? So like we still see shades of that today. Like people are actually willing to die for their conservative beliefs. Right?
And do.
Quite correct.
And do.
Quite correct. And truly believe, and not to say that their beliefs aren't valid, because that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is your convictions are so strong that you would actually die. And I don't know if I'm willing to do that.
I think there are certain things that I would cleave to the way Krolla is cleaving. I mean, because Krolla, one of the things I really do like about Krolla's character is that Krolla really does seem to worry about his people. His concern is that they, as a society, are not prepared to handle being told that they're no longer the center of the universe. And I think that's a fair cop. And I really think,
I agree.
Like if you look at 2020 2020, 2021, 2022 as, part of an evolution of a societal movement. And as we're looking at sort of this kind of culture clash, this culture war, which is what Krolla was afraid of in 1991, is actually happening now in 2022, because we're starting to see a lot of last gasps of, well, it has to be this way, it has to be this way, blah, 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 blah. We're seeing a lot of very members of a very specific demographic who are suddenly very upset that they're no longer the standard. And while the rest of us view this as progress, as a good thing, as evolution, for them it's painful. For them it's terrifying.
Mhm.
And I find myself really struggling to balance sympathy and empathy with my urge to shake them.
Okay. That's so silly. That's so silly. No.
Except that I defy you. I defy you to argue otherwise.
No, actually, I do agree with you. If you think about it, almost every character identified the fact that this is not going to end well. Every the BB Newworth character, obviously Krolla, the president, even the head of the space agent, like every last one of them said, if you do this, this is not going to end well. They know their own society. They knew that this was a delicate balance, right? Having the president, of course, this was pre-Riker, the knowledge of Riker, having the president say, no, we're going to go in this direction, that could have slowly eased them in, because remember, he also said this is going to be the last initiative that we take for quite some time. So even he recognized that this was probably a bridge too far, but if it was the last advancement, that'll be okay.
And by that you mean like the war program and
Correct.
Experiencing first contact.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I also wonder what we're cheating everyone of. Like, the Malkorians make the decision based on Krolla's paranoia, and yeah, Krolla's paranoia is steeped in.
It would have been endemic of other people's as well.
But how many, right? I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about.
It's always the vocal minority. Always.
Right, and that's kind of, I guess that's what I'm thinking of. Like, the rest of the Malkorians been more excited to see. I mean, really see aliens.
I think a good bit would have been apprehensive, but another sizable group, I'm not going to say majority, would have been curious.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's disingenuous of us to sit here and say it wouldn't have been terrifying. Because I think it would be.
Yeah, I see. I see all of it. I see the gambit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, it's really funny, right? So I've been doing these lectures for Lent, and one of the things that I frequently think about is that the first thing every angel in the Bible ever says is, "Don't be afraid."
And yet they were.
Right. Well, but the point is that they're so alien, they're so different, that they're terrifying. Like, there's an automatic assumption that the shepherds, whatever, are going to be intimidated, and I think that's fair. Which is not to say that, like, I'm espousing or advocating religion here. I just think it's an interesting aspect of storytelling that a book that comes from an oral tradition, 2,000 years ago, has basically the same thematic structure or the sub theme here that we're looking at in a 1991 Star Trek episode.
Well, you pull from what you know in order to write a story, right? And then, but just think about it. Like, if you were to see today's technology as a 10-year-old, you probably would have been like, what is, I mean, it wouldn't have taken you as long, but let's say all of a sudden now it's 500 years of advancement.
I gotta tell you, I'm not entirely sure because I am a kid of the Flight of the Navigator generation.
I don't know what that is. I don't know
Oh
what
my
that
God,
is.
Jermaine, I am sending you a Disney like subscription or whatever because like you've got to see this movie. It's fantastic. I think it's a very young Fred Savage, um, who basically gets kidnapped by a robotic ship.
Oh.
And this ship is gorgeous. Like the design elements of this are phenomenal, and it's a movie that I think was made in '81.
Oh
But
wow.
again, I've been killing it right on facts lately, so take that with a grain of salt. Possibly 40 pounds of rock salt. I don't know. But it's early '80s, late '70s, early '80s when they were making this, and he gets kidnapped by this ship, and the ship is phenomenal. The experience is phenomenal, and um, but he ends up in the future, in a future that he doesn't belong to.
Mhm.
Um, and he ends up with a lot of scientists that are trying to figure things out and are doing things that aren't necessarily wrong or damaging, but they certainly aren't telling him the full truth. And he
Mm.
reacts badly to that. And basically, he goes and busts the starship out of, like the robot ship, out of like NASA's custody.
Mhm.
My point after all of that is that he's never afraid so much of the character Max, which is the puppet, voiced by Paul Rubens. That is true. The puppet, the character of Max, the ship, like that's not what's frightening. It's getting left in a place he doesn't belong that's terrifying.
Mm. Mm.
And so, like, I guess for me,
What is your identity? It's the loss of identity.
it's a loss of identity. It's a feeling of displacement in the sense
Mhm.
that he's no longer in his correct time. So his little brother is now older than he is.
Oh, so he's in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
his little brother is older than he is. His parents are older, and his parents are incredibly traumatized by the loss of their child. I mean, I think he was gone something like 13 years
Yeah.
before he
Yeah.
reappears. And
Yeah.
then, he wakes up basically where he thought he was, and goes to this house, and it turns out that like the house has been sold, his parents have moved. Like, I mean, just this
Yeah.
whole, like life went on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he has no idea what's going on. And of course, they don't. Like, I mean, everybody's just like, wait a minute, like it's been 13 years. Why have you not aged?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
It's very much kind of the same relationship like the doctors on Malcoria. No, look at me. I'm tying it back to Star Trek now. Look at me. I'm learning. It's great. It's very much the same sort of thing where there's like, how is this possible? What has been going on? And the kid's brain is full of star charts. And so like they somehow managed to get their Apple IIe computers to like tap into his brain. We're gonna hand wave that, but I mean, it's very much that kind of thing where they're trying to figure out like, what is this alien intelligence? What does the alien know? What is out there?
Mhm. Mhm.
And they react, in part in fear. And so 1991, right? Also, it's a post ET world.
Mhm.
We're very much afraid of. We're becoming more afraid, I think,
The
of the
other.
than
I'm
we
afraid
were.
of the other.
Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that in the 60s, because right in the 60s, remember, TOS actually takes place during the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
So in the 60s, even though like we are literally experiencing violence against what we perceive as the other, Roddenberry's vision is looking at that and has experienced like the Japanese American internment camps and the genocide that was going on in World War II. So his vision is that we move beyond it. In 1991, I think we're asking the question, are we really?
Or is it not, are we really, but have we overstepped? Did we go too far?
I think that's a really good conversation to have about the 2003 episode we're going to cover later. Because I really think that's a much more... I think that's much more relevant in light of Archer's decision and Archer's conversations with Trip
Okay.
in that episode. We are going to... So, spoilers... we're going to cover Cogenitor, which is one of Enterprise's more infamous episodes, for good reason. Because Archer and Starfleet and the Federation, the Proto-Federation, don't come off terribly well in that episode.
Okay.
I think in 1991, we're still not entirely sure about overstepping so much. There's a,
So in the
he has a
early
much
90s,
greater awareness of the determinism of individual cultures than TOS did, to be fair. Because, I mean, Kirk, Spock, and Bones routinely interfere in the development of all kinds of cultures. Like, A Private Little War is literally a proxy war involving a Stone Age society that goes on between the Federation and the Klingons, right?
right. And so just to take that a step further, so what we see in TNG is we now see the Prime Directive where they're not getting involved in all of those. So they're actively trying not to overstep. And so if you recall, in the early 90s, there was this big debate about Lord Jesus, it was affirmative action, where the right was saying, oh no, affirmative action is like a quota system where you've got to have a certain percentage of this and this and that. Well, that's not exactly what affirmative action was, but
they eventually won on that issue.
Well, right, and so the point was they were the right was saying the left overstepped, and so let's course correct.
I think
and it was more
it was a reaction to nation building efforts. There was with respect to American foreign policy, and admittedly, this is still Bush 1, not Clinton, and Clinton really came under fire for this. But there was a perception that that the United States had its fingers in many pies, and I think there was a question about how many pies should we be baking. And I'm really just stretching this metaphor beyond all reason at this point.
That's my political science hat. And I'm trying not to go down that road.
Yes, this is where we are. I think you should go down this road, because I think that's one of the things that's really great about looking critically at these episodes, because Star Trek is very, very much a product of the culture it comes out of. And what's really fantastic about Star Trek is that we have enough history and enough franchise installments that we can actually see an evolution in a way that we don't get to see with other science fiction or any other kinds of franchises, really.
True. But my political science hat would basically say, no, hegemony basically says, no, someone has got to be in charge. Someone has got to say, nah, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. And if you do this, we're going to respond in this way. We're going to respond economically. We're going to respond militaristically. We're going to respond diplomatically. We're going to respond in all of these different ways. Even if not specifically economically, but we're gonna hit you financially. We're gonna do all of these different things if you do this. Someone has got to be the world's cop, and it just so happens that the United States is the world's cop. So that overreaction to me was dumbfounded, and when all of that was going on, everything in me was just screaming, come on, man. If it's not us, it's somebody else. It's got to be somebody else.
That's very funny because, right, 1991, the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in 1991, not too far beyond that. So we're literally seeing the United States stepping into restructure, and other world powers stepping in to restructure what's going to happen in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that's also part of it, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about hegemony, you're talking about like being the world's cop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a really interesting question to be asked here about, like, is that what First Contact is looking at? Are we
not at all.
Conversation
not at all. To me, when I think about First Contact, all I think of is this: is like, hey, look, there's this broader community of folks. We're peaceful. Or at least we like to think that we're peaceful.
More or less. Let's go with more or less.
Right.
Romulans,
we want to embrace you. We want to embrace the diversity of you. We don't want to rush you. We want to be able to say, hey, look, if you go here, you're gonna run across this alien species, and it might not end up the way that you like. So why don't we just kind of let you know, continue to explore, but you might not want to explore around here. You know what I'm saying? Like, those are the type things that I think about when I think about First Contact. And then, yes, we're going to have a relationship with you. We're going to have a relationship with you. We're going to exchange information, cultural exchanges, and technologically, right? We're going to walk you through it. We're going to walk you through it. We're not going to give you everything. We're not going to give you everything. But once you've gotten to that point where you've kind of, it's kind of like Enterprise, the beginning of Enterprise. You've gotten to this point. If you can get there faster, get there faster. You know that it's there.
Yeah, but I mean, the Vulcans are in Enterprise. The Vulcans are pretty clear that they are not going to give them, because the Vulcans were rocking like what, warp 7. Warp 8 by this point.
Don't make me lie.
And the whole point is that humanity had only just developed the warp 6 engine, and the Archer's real big hate on, because man does have a hate boner on for the Vulcans until
it's because of how they did his father.
Yes, and the point of that is that they weren't sharing any of their information, they weren't sharing any of their technology. They were literally waiting for, I mean, they were waiting for humanity to come along and fix itself, right, and develop its own technology. So I think, and Picard is very clear with Durbin that they are not going to share tech. That the Valkorians are going to have to develop their own tech. They're going to have to develop their own society. They're going to have to develop. But they are going to open up diplomatic relations. They are going to open up. Although, I mean, just basically to see how this goes out. And
so when I say technology, I'm saying, like, let's say what's the name of Malkovians, whatever. Let's say they have some type of technology that the Federation doesn't have. Hey, you have this technology that we don't have. We would love to find out about that. Perhaps there's something else that you might need that you're close to, figuring out. And perhaps we could help you along with that. That's what I mean by exchanging technology. Just to be a bit.
So I think that's interesting because, like, and I'm putting on my opposite Treks hat here. There's a lot of pretty real mercantilism in the Federation. The Federation spends a lot of time trying to isolate dilithium deposits and other natural resource deposits in order to, supplement its own generational capacity, right? I mean, the dilithium thing's a huge deal. Even as far up as Discovery, right? Like, so when we talk about, like, are we helping these nice people into the interstellar community because we, out of the goodness of our hearts, or I say "our" as in the Federation because I'm wearing my Federation outfit right now. So just gonna go
I always think of myself as being part of the Federation. I'm a citizen of the Federation. Forget you.
I love you, Jermaine. But yeah, no, there are many days in which I would much rather be a citizen of the Federation But yeah, I think there's a really good question to ask. Like, is the Federation as altruistic as it holds itself out to be? We don't get a sense of that here in First Contact. The episode, not the movie. We don't get that here, but I mean, there are a number of situations where, especially in TOS, they go out because they've got to negotiate for dilithium, for like at one point they're on tear because they need something, or tear because they need something, not because they have any interest in dealing with the crazy society that lives there. Remember that episode? That's the episode where, like, that's Friday's Child, where Bones has to deliver a baby, and there's this whole conversation about, like, the entire culture was warlike, and everybody's just like, this is nuts.
I can't say that I recall that episode right now.
I don't know. There was something about, like, Bones delivering a baby on the side of a rock that impressed me and apparently imprinted itself on my subconscious.
It's almost like the burning bush, like,
right? Right? It's kind of terrifying. Again, you know, like, I mean, if I'm standing in front of a bush that's on fire and it starts talking to me, I'm going to start wondering if I need antipsychotics. Right? I'm not gonna take that on faith, but it's a divine being coming to talk to me.
Yeah.
Which is just bananas. Also, can we have a brief conversation? And I say brief, like, we're 37 minutes into this. Can we have a brief conversation about the whole business with, like, I would like to have sex with an alien? Like, what was that mess?
Like, please, I want to have sex with you.
Right? I mean, she's literally bargaining. Like, her aim in his escape that he has to have in order to, you know, not be vivisected.
But wait. This is the thing that I didn't think about until I was, like, sitting here laughing. I was like, if he hadn't, and we don't know whether or not they actually had sex. I'm assuming they had sex. But had they not had sex, he probably would have gotten away.
I know. There's also that, right? Like, I mean, there's that word. But okay, so, you know, like, a fun conversation. And we've talked a little bit about this on FTP. Flip the gender roles for a second in your head.
Okay.
Flip the gender roles. And it is a male character talking to a female character and saying, I will help you escape if you have sex with me.
Wow. That's tantamount to rape.
And it is here too. And the only reason that this is played for laughs is, one, because it's Riker, and Riker is kind of like the stand-in for Kirk. But I mean, I think Riker gets an unfair reputation as being a bit of a playboy, because he's not. He's actually remarkably respectful about how he conducts his relationship. So, you know, go him.
20 years into the future.
Go him. But yeah, like, I mean, think about that for a second. There's an episode of The Orville, and I cannot remember.
The one you hate?
No, it's not the one I hate. You know, the episode whose name we shall not mention. It's not that one. It's a different one. It's Dr. Claire ends up crashing with I don't remember his name, the Kalon, the robot dude, and her kids on this planet.
Yeah.
And she, some indigenous dude grabbed her. And I say indigenous in the sense that he's native to that planet. Like, I'm not interested in getting into a conversation about indigenous versus not. Like, okay.
No, I understand what you mean.
Yeah. I just want to say that because that's a pretty fraught term. And I would probably do better to think of a better term, but, like, I'm dying here.
Native.
Sure. I don't know. It's kind of there's a whole lot of conversation about that. Anyway, so he finds her and carts her off to his tower of safety and locks her in a room, and then basically says, "Oh, no, I'm never letting you out for your safety.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having a real conversation with my editor, and I love my editor. John's great. But like, we're having this real conversation about whether that's terrifying or not. And for me, that's terrifying.
Yeah, you're limiting.
You're literally telling this person, another sentient being, you can't do anything I don't want you to do.
Right.
Because that's the subtext that's going on here. And the question becomes like, what does he want from Claire? And there's a real kind of, if I may, nice guy vibe to that.
Yeah, like either way that it goes, even if all he wanted was companionship, it's a woman, right? It still is a woman,
right? And she's being compelled.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is forcing her to provide that companionship,
right?
And it's a really for me, it was a really uncomfortable episode to watch, and so Claire resorts to pretty targeted violence in order to escape. And there was some conversation about whether or not that was quote unquote fair. And I was just kind of like, no. This is some Kathy Bates crazy that she's escaping.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody looks at me like they haven't seen Misery. Try again. Because if you're watching this podcast, you're old enough to have seen this movie.
Well, no, I just want to go back for a second. The BB New Earth character Linnell, so she forces Riker basically to have sex with her, and so my question though, going back to
we're gonna have to
episode,
put so many content warnings on this video, by the way, like just by sheer accident.
So she forces him to have sex with her, and so my question is, what if that results in a baby? And in that particular society, remember, the thought was, after a certain amount of time, it's just rumors, right now it's just rumors, and people will forget these rumors. But if she has a baby from Riker, it's no longer a rumor. Like, this is like,
so the fun part about that is I really believe that there are enough genetic differences between humans and Malkorians that we're not going to have to worry about that.
I don't know about all that.
Because, well, there's a whole conversation actually about Spock. If you read the novel, especially if you read the novelization of the 2009 movie, which, considering that we have had mentions of Lieutenant Yor in canon, it's canon. I know, guys, just embrace it.
Yeah, they did mention the fact that it was difficult for them to have Spock.
Because the problem was they were trying to combine alien DNA and trying to do that in a way that would be viable. Even at the end of Enterprise, when Terra Prime creates an infant from DNA taken from both Trip and T'Pol, that infant ultimately dies because it's not viable.
Right, but we later found out that they did something that Phlox could have easily corrected, and it would have been okay. And let's take it a step further. So Alexander, Worf's son, and so therefore the son's mother, she's half Klingon, half human. So is B'Elanna, half Klingon, half human. My point in saying all of this is,
I think there's enough shared DNA.
They give us a lot of examples of I'm not gonna say but different species coming together.
I mean, Naomi Wildman.
Right. Also Deanna Troi.
Yes, but I think there's also a lot of really good indication that this involves some pretty advanced technological intervention to get there.
An assumption. Because and the reason I say that is because
but also
the whole idea of Susie Plaxton's character, I don't remember her real name, but she was half Klingon, half human. What's her name?
Kaylor.
We didn't know anything about genetic whatever until the Enterprise comes along. At that particular point in time, it was just, hey, they got together. Same thing with Spock. We didn't know all about that. It was just, hey, this happened.
Yeah, but again, like I said, we now have. I mean, if we're going with canon, and that's one of those things that I hate using that word, but we're going to go with it, because canon is also really fraught because nerds get really upset about what is and is not canon, like really upset. Like I'm gonna need y'all to calm down. Just calm down. And clearly I am a member of the nerd subgroup because like I am sitting here in a science blue uniform on a Star Trek podcast. But I do think there's enough discussion about the things that they have to do in order to create species hybrids that I don't know that it would have happened arbitrarily. But it's an interesting question. Like, I mean, if we do get a Riker Linnell hybrid, you're right. I mean, then all of the shenanigans would have been
that forces the conversation. That definitely forces the conversation within their society. And so now, we've got to think about this. And what happens if, let's say, I don't know, let's say there's an issue and they need to save the baby. You know what I'm saying? Let's say the baby ends up looking more like them than human. But and let's say that later on in life there's some issue and now they really need to contact Starfleet or the Federation and they need their help. You know what I'm saying? Like it's more what if. This is what if. This is Manny's domain.
Where's Manny when we need him? But there would be no way, because that was actually one of the really solid things that gets communicated, which is that we're just tabling the discussion and the Federation are going wherever. And to my knowledge, they actually retrieve every member of the research team except Riker. Like that's, again, that takes place before most of the action in the episode occurs. So the question would become, are we going to continue, like now that we know that the Malkorians are tabling that conversation and are, effectively shelving the warp project? I mean, do they have a legitimate interest in monitoring the society anymore?
No, they don't. But what if the Malkorians contact Starfleet? That's a different situation.
How would they?
They also said that they've been monitoring them, right? They've been monitoring their broadcast communications,
like their Star Trek,
meaning Starfleet has
Star traffic. But again, like they've been monitoring on the basis of like this is a society that's reaching a kind of warp capability. And again, how they know that is a great question, and maybe goes to your point.
Well, we see in other episodes of TNG where they visit other cultures, and it was a Vulcan type.
Yeah, the Mintakans. You're talking about Who Watches the Watchers, and that was, right. So they had an anthropological team that were basically watching this culture behind like a glorified duck blind, which has some very real ethical implications. Right, because these are sentient peoples. And there's a question about, are they consenting? And the answer is they can't. They can't consent because they don't know what's going on. So put yourself in their place for a second. The Mintakans, God bless them, handle it far better than most of us would, and that I think is actually why they're called they chose to make them a proto-Vulcan society, because I think anybody else would not have handled that nearly as gracefully as the Mintakans did. But if you think about it, like if you discovered that some dude or person or whatever is camped out in your backyard watching you go about your business every day, I mean, there's a violation there.
Okay, so I don't think I would necessarily see it as a violation, and the reason I wouldn't see it as a violation is because everyone else in my society has the same ability to do that as well. So I wouldn't necessarily see it as a violation, but I would see it as kind of like, is this what you've been doing, and to what effect have you been doing it? So if they were then able to say, no, we've been perched here and we've only been looking at your society. We don't even know what you're saying. We're not in your homes. We're overlooking your society. We want to see what you're doing, and we want to try to figure out why you're doing what you're doing. We don't even know your language.
Except for the fact that we have the UT, and the UT is magic and lets us know all languages, unless you're like
But they
Breen
didn't.
or
They
unless you're Shellyak or the
but they
Twi'lek.
didn't really like interact with them all that much.
No, they didn't interact with them at all. That was part of the point, except that they're videoing them, they're porting them, and all of that jazz.
I don't think that I would be all. I'm not gonna say that I would be super happy about it, but I don't think I would want to start a war or even
No,
like.
okay, I'm not saying that. I'm not implying that this is the sort of thing that results in violence. And I think that's a great thing that Durbin does in this episode. Is he basically says, okay, it's creepy. Maybe don't do that again, but I understand why you did it. But also don't let anybody else know, because that would start like riots.
Mhm.
And living where I live in the United States, I can tell you now, it would cause riots. It would cause riots. I literally stood in line at a bank to talk. I had to open an account for something here, and the individual, like, basically there was only one loan officer or like bank officer or whatever that could do this, that was in this bank, and that person was stuck talking to this woman, this older woman. She walks in with 8 pickle jars full of cash, I think I counted, and literally is looking at the bank officer and wants to know if the government's going to know how much money she has. And if the government's going to know how much money she has, then she doesn't want to open an account, because she doesn't want the government to know how much money she has. And the bank officer's like, well, yeah, if you have over X amount of dollars, then there's some reporting issues, but like, nobody cares. But she sure did. Like, where I live, cash is it's in a cash economy. Which is bananas, right? Like, because I moved here and was unprepared for that, because I hadn't used cash in, I don't know, 7 years before that, and now I carry far more than I possibly should, because like, it's not uncommon to find an establishment that does not take credit cards or check.
They don't even accept checks?
No.
I'm gonna need them to get it together. All right, Marie.
This is literally a thing I have said over and over and over again. But my point is that like, while we might accept, like, because admittedly, like, I mean, we're Star Trek fans, we're thinking about this a little differently than I think than many people might. But there are enough people, kind of like the Krolla set, if you will, that would not accept it and would see it as being a violation.
So check this out. So I teach, and students are always recording, right? And it's so much so, like, they're recording even when they're walking down the hallway, and like, no one responds to it, even when kids are outside and someone is recording and they're in the background. They know that the kid is recording them. There's absolutely, like, there's no issue with that, even though, I know what you're probably going to say. Well, they can actually see them, right? They can have an idea of what it is that they're going to use this for. But the issue, though, is you don't know what a person is going to do with that video. You don't know how it's going to make you look, and yet we're okay with a phone or a camera in our faces. And I say that to say is that, I think in our society today, we're not going to overreact to that, especially if I know you're not in my home, you're not seeing what I'm doing, you don't know what I'm talking about, you're just viewing it from a public space.
How important do you think the understanding that these are people who are just observing you because they're looking at you as a zoologic specimen versus like the knowledge that like some rando is going to put you on TikTok?
Well,
Maybe.
I don't think that that's what. So okay, so yes, they are observing me. They do want to know a little. They want to know about my culture. Like I get that. I get that
Like, I mean,
aspect
you're
of
going
it.
to end up on Wild
However,
Safari.
they're not confining me. They're not telling me where I can live. They're not telling me what I can eat. They're not feeding me. They're not. You know what I'm saying? Like all of that is just a little different.
No. I mean, it's literally like David Attenborough. Like this is going to be a wild discovery kind of thing, and David Attenborough, or the Star Trek equivalent of David Attenborough, is going to be narrating your life.
Yeah, I still don't think that that's. I don't think that.
I mean,
that's
I don't
a
know,
big
man.
deal.
I really kind of think that David Attenborough would get a kick out of like narrating my regular life. And look, we see here an evidence of a dominance display by the older of the two young children. That's kind of my life.
Marie,
I was
it's a
trying to
little
be fun
late
when it died.
It's a little late for me.
Ditto. And we are, 57 minutes in. So I guess, like final thoughts.
Final thoughts about this particular episode, First Contact,
or even where we're going to go, or even where we're going to go next. Looking forward to other franchise installment approaches to First Contact.
Well, what I would say, which is what I was about to say, is there's much more sophistication about First Contact between TOS and TNG. Clearly, there's talk about the Prime Directive. There's also Picard specifically says, if you tell me to go, I'm gonna go. You know what I'm saying? And that's exactly what he did when the president was like, okay, Picard, you told me once that if I needed you to go, you would go. Picard bowed his head and he was like, yes, okay.
All right, peace.
And that was exactly what he did. So it's a very it's almost like I want to work with you. Personal relationships matter the most. I need you to trust me. I want to trust you. All right. And so I see a lot of that. It's sophistication. It's a sophistication in how they deal with First Contact.
Right. And I am certainly looking forward to seeing what we are going to, like exploring this from different perspectives, because I think we're going to see how time affects it, because we're going to cover Little Green Men with Deep Space Nine, also Living Witness with Voyager, and then we are going to talk, as mentioned before, about Cogenitor and, what overstepping is and where we should or should not overstep going forward, and, then talk about communication later with Species 10C. So again, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I really certainly hope that you tune into the rest of these installments, and we will see you on First Contact Day.
See you.
Now, again, I'm going to say this again because we're near the end of our show. If you are our allies, we are not talking to you. We are not talking to you. This does not... Okay? We're not talking to you. Stop trying to take our and make it your business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It ain't got nothing to do with you.
Our experience of grief independently.
Bruh.
Yes.
I love that they're in the comments.
So much is like I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah. They should brought their child out. Such a good point, Will. God, that's such a good point. He's really thought about it too. You should be here. William, get over here.
I thought he had a girlfriend on Insta. It's been ages since I've mucked about, but
Okay, moving on. Let's move on.
yeah, we gotta move on.